Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to have you here and welcome to the very first Women's Plus Health Research Trainee Conference. This is a collaboration between the Women's Health Research Cluster and the Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada. And we're really excited for you all to join us for an exciting program today. It's going to kick off with an expert panel that brings together three women's health professionals who are going to share the wisdom that they've cultivated across their careers with us. After that, we're going to hear from a diverse group of young professionals as they share their women's health research in oral presentations and poster presentations before we finish the day with an award ceremony. At any point during the conference, if you hear something that is insightful, interesting, just all around too good to keep to yourselves, we encourage you to take to social media, share it with your network, and use the hashtag WHRTC. If you want us to see your post and to retweet it, please tag us at Research on WH and at Power_Canada. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Women's Health Research Cluster in Power operates out of Vancouver, British Columbia, which is a part of the unceded homelands of the Coast Salish peoples and the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We recognize that we live, work, play, and participate in community on the unceded, ceded, and traditional territories of the 203 First Nations, along with 38 Métis chartered communities, each of which possess their own unique traditions and history here on this land that we now refer to as British Columbia. We acknowledge the importance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's call to action, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the BC Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. In all of our work, we are committed to ensuring Indigenous women's rights to health and safety and the equal opportunity to participate in a manner that recognizes and respects Indigenous cultures and traditions. I encourage you all to take a moment and to share with us in the Zoom chat what lands you're calling in from today. And I also want to thank all of the groups and the individuals that contribute to the Women's Health Research Cluster and Power, because all of those sponsorships and donations make events like this possible. So in particular, I want to thank the University of British Columbia, the Alberta Women's Health Foundation, the BC Women's Health Foundation, the Women's College Hospital Foundation, and the IWK Foundation, as well as the IGH Trainee Network. Thank you so much to all of these groups. And we want to take a moment so that you can get to know us a bit. So I'm going to ask Tamil to come on and to let us know a little bit more about Power.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those that are joining us from across Turtle Island and indeed around the world. So Power is a partnership between the Women's Health Research Institute, the Women's Health Research Cluster, the Women and Children's Health Research Institute in Alberta, IWK Health in the Maritimes, and of course, Women's College Research Institute at Women's College Hospital in Toronto, Ontario. And our vision is really to create better health, realize better health for all women, trans, and non-binary people through research equity, excellence, and inclusion. So better health through better research. We bring together 775 women's health researchers who come from all disciplines, from the social sciences to the biomedical sciences, clinicians, systems researchers, engineers. It's a very diverse group, and these researchers mentor more than 1,000 trainees annually. We hold regular events, and I would invite you to subscribe to our updates and check out what we have to offer at www.power.org. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Tamil. And in case you're not familiar with the Women's Health Research Cluster, we are an international multidisciplinary network of women's health stakeholders who work together to ensure that women and girls can live equitably healthy lives across their lifespan. We also have lots of events outside of this conference. We have annual trainee awards. We have working groups. We've got a blog and a podcast. So there's so much for you to dig into and get engaged with. And we welcome you to become a member, join a working group, or just reach out to us in general if you want to get more involved. We're always looking for new people to meet and to connect with. Okay, so now that you know a bit about us, we want to learn more about professional careers in women's health. So I'm going to invite Bonnie Lee, who is a PhD student in a neuroscience program at the University of British Columbia, to moderate this session. She's not just a PhD student, though. Bonnie is also an IGH Trainee Network chapter lead at the University of British Columbia. I want to tell you a bit about the IGH Training Network in case you don't know what they are, because it's a great resource for you as well. So IGH stands for the Institute of Gender and Health, and the Institute of Gender and Health serves to foster research excellence regarding the influence of sex and gender on health and to apply these findings to address pressing health challenges. The Trainee Network consists of trainees across Canada with hubs across lots of the Canadian educational institutions, like the one that Bonnie is the chapter lead of at UBC. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code quickly on the screen here so you can learn more. It'll direct you right to their website. And we're really thankful to the IGH Training Network because they are sponsoring 2 of our People's Choice Poster Awards today. So later in the day, I'm going to give you instructions about voting for your favorite poster. Just for now, know that you're going to be voting for a poster that does an outstanding job at addressing women's health, sex, or gender. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Bonnie come on and introduce our panelists.
Hi, everyone. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Bonnie, and I am moderating today's panel discussion as the trainee lead of the Institute of Gender and Health. It is a great pleasure to welcome you and to introduce our expert panelists and women's health research leaders, Dr. Lisa Galea, Dr. Lori Brado, and Dr. Rulon Perrick. So Dr. Lori Brado is a psychologist and a full professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of British Columbia, where she holds a Canada Research Chair in Women's Sexual Health and is the Director of UBC Sexual Health Research. Her research primarily focuses on developing and testing psychological and mindfulness-based interventions for women with sexual desire and arousal difficulties and women with chronic genital pain. She is a practicing clinical psychologist and the executive director of the Women's Health Research Institute, a real and virtual organization dedicated to facilitating and building a community for women's health research in BC. Dr. Lisa Galea is a neuroscientist and the inaugural Women Mind Tree Living Family Chair in Women's Mental Health and senior scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. Dr. Galea is a world-renowned expert in sex hormone influences on brain and behavior. Lisa leads the Women's Health Research Cluster, an international network of multidisciplinary professionals that collectively strive to create a future where women and girls can live equitably healthy lives across their lifespan. And last but not least, Dr. Rulon Perrick is a practicing nephrologist and the Vice President Academics at Women's College Hospital, where she leads advancement of the hospital's goals to build sustainable world-class research, innovation, and education. Dr. Perrick is an international leader in clinical epidemiology and translational research in kidney disease and a professor of pediatrics and medicine at the University of Toronto. All 3 of our panelists and the Women's Health Research Institute that they lead belong to the Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada, also known as POWER, that we heard a little bit about this morning, an alliance dedicated to achieving better health for all women, trans, and non-binary people through research equity, excellence, and inclusion. The Women's Health Research Cluster and POWER are delighted to be co-convening this trainee research conference and to kicking off this expert panel. So let me get started by asking Lisa and Lori, what advice would you give to your younger self about starting a career in the women's health field?
Who wants to go first? You said Lisa and Lori. Does that mean I get to go first? And Lori, you're still muted. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here joining you. I'll just very quickly, I don't know, I wrote down 4 pieces of advice, but I don't think I have that much time to give you 4 pieces of advice, but I'm sure we can get to more of it later if we have more time. But I'd say the first piece of advice I'd give you is, and it's not specific to women's health, it's just that, maybe I'll give it to you. there are many pathways to success. So what I learned really early in my career is that I get advice from somebody and then I'd ask somebody else because I'm just that type of person. And I would get, maybe advice A from person one and advice minus A from person two. And so I learned pretty early that there are many different ways that you can get to where you want to go. And so if you are asking for advice and something doesn't seem right to you, just ask somebody else, and maybe you'll ask enough people that you'll get the advice that you want and need. That's my big piece of advice. Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that. And my response is going to be so similarly. It's like preparing yourself for a journey that does not have a single map. It uses several developing maps that are continually changing and evolving and are drawn up by the people who are just a few years ahead of you. The other students, your mentors, those in your field that you're learning from and working with. Maybe a piece of advice based on my own experience is that this career in women's health it's so much more than identifying a research question and following the traditional steps of the scientific method to answer that question. So had I known how difficult it was to secure funding, I may have been less hard on myself when I didn't get funding. Or had I known how important relationships were, such as relationships with clinicians and patients and community groups and government allies and so many others, I probably would have started sooner in that relationship building. And I also wish I knew how rewarding it would eventually be, and especially as someone who has the great privilege of offering clinical care to women, and in my case, women with sexual problems and genital pelvic pain. When I'm able to sit in the clinic and share information from the published literature to a person who is sitting in front of me in tears, who has shared stories of being dismissed and misunderstood and told it's all in her head, and to see the life-changing impact that validating women's concerns, listening to them and offering them evidence-based information. It's directly from the science that you all are doing. It's just a real privilege and honor, and helps me really get through the months and years of difficult funding and et cetera. So that would be my advice, is prepare for a journey with no map.
Yeah, and speaking of difficult funding and other challenges, I'd love to hear more about the challenges you've encountered as you progress throughout your career, and what has been most important for helping you overcome these challenges.
To Lori and Luann.
Yeah, to Lori.
Do you want me to go first? Okay. So maybe just a little bit about how I came to UBC. I had actually accepted a position at the University of Washington in Seattle, in a really well-known, well-funded academic health center. And the main reason I left was because colleagues in my field of sexuality research were being threatened by a very loud group of activists who lobbied the NIH to defund already funded research teams in the United States who were doing research on sexuality. And the concern was about the negative impacts of sex research on the family. And so as a beginning researcher myself, I was really worried about not being able to secure funding. And so I left that position and I came to UBC. Really glad I did, of course. But what I did not realize was that the threat of funding to sex research that I was seeing in the US was totally mirrored by the threat to funding or the lack of funding in women's health research that I experienced in Canada. So I feel like I was somewhat being doubly targeted, both as a women's health researcher and as a sex researcher. There was a period in my academic career, about 5 years into my appointment, when I was outside of the window of available funding as an early career researcher, and I hit a dry spell. My budgets were running out. I had to reduce my staff, and I actually had a meeting with my department head and gave notice that I was going to be leaving my academic job. And when another senior colleague in the department learned about this, she offered to give me some bridge funding to tide me over until I could secure the next grant, which was an incredible, just incredible act of generosity and really steered the direction of my career. I stayed in academia. I was able to eventually get the grant. And so I really learned the incredible value of supporting junior colleagues and mentorship. And since then have really tried to pay it forward by offering advice, sometimes unsolicited, wherever I could.
Thank you so much. And speaking of that, thank you for being here today and sharing with our trainees your pieces of advice. How about Roland? We'd love to hear from you as well. What kind of challenges have you encountered and what is important for learning to overcome those challenges?
So I think that the thing that I've learned is you have to recognize that getting grants, getting papers, all of these things sometimes challenge us, and that you shouldn't take it personally. You're actually using it as a growth or an opportunity to actually grow and learn. And I think one of the things I would say is it's really important to have that growth mindset when you're thinking about academic medicine and clinical care and research, in that you're ready to take on those challenges and you're willing to keep going back, and you're willing to keep persisting, and really because you're passionate about the topic and you really want to make a difference. And so I think that passion, persistence, and perseverance are really, really important traits that you need to have to be able to keep going at it, right? And recognize that you have to know what that question is that you want to answer and what you want to do, because that's really the reason you're there. And just keep going for it, and don't let people dissuade you that it's not important, that it's not valued, and how you're approaching it is not right. Sometimes you have to definitely sort of wiggle around certain things, but you're always moving forward. You're just moving straight. And I think that's something that you need to think about. And one of the things that I tell people is there's a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit. And I think it's a great book to read because it talks about flow and practice, and that you need to become an expert at something, which we all feel that we need to become an expert at. And then you have flow once you really reach your 10,000 hours. But what she also writes about is non-catastrophic failure. And I think that we have repeated, episodes of these non-catastrophic failure, and that's actually good because you grow and you learn, and it's okay. Like, it's totally okay. And I think people have to be ready to accept that occasionally things are not going to work out, but the next time it could work out, and it could be really big and have a massive impact. And so you have to think about those things and sort of not give up. And so I think having grit is really, really important. And I think willing to persist at something and persevere and be passionate about it is really important. And so don't let people dissuade you from that. You just really need to keep that as your North Star and recognize what's really important to you, and just, keep at it. And so when you get dissuaded or when you get discouraged, what's really important is talk to people and recognize that you're not in it alone, that you do have your mentor, but you do have work friends, and you do have sponsors, and you do have people who are going to nominate you to things. And those are the kind of people you form this network, this team that kind of helps support you to say that you're on the right track. And that's really the group that you should use. Sometimes people think that there's only one mentor, and I think probably you have a group of mentors and a group of people who support you. And you need to think about using that kitchen cabinet that are really going to help you move forward and develop that and nurture that. And so I think that's something that's really helpful also to keep you going, especially when times are challenging. And times will be challenging because there's always something going on that's unexpected. And, we've all survived the pandemic, and and now we're dealing with fires in BC, Ontario, and Quebec. And, somebody was asking us about fires in the operating room or smoke in the operating room. Like, we're always dealing with something new and challenging. It's just different every time. And so I think just recognize that that's just the way of the world at the moment, and things will change, and you just got to learn how to go with it and use it as an opportunity to learn and think about something differently.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of that, this is a great segue to our next question, which is, can you give us an example of a mistake you've made in your career, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I think I made several mistakes. I don't think I could just give one. But what I will tell you is that I read a book. I read a lot of books because I'm actually sort of interested in thinking about things. And I think one of the books that I read recently was a book by Sally Helgesen, which is called How Women Rise. And it has the 12 things that women typically do. And I went, oh, look, I do all 12. Great. And so, and I could tell you that I did all 12 during that time. And so one of the things was, I think this is common for most women, is that we feel that when people ask us to do things, that we're not an expert in that area. And we need to become the expert. And we need to have the skills to do it. And we are uncomfortable sort of leaping at something when we might only have half the skills, or we might not know that we actually have the skills, but you think you don't have the skills. And so I think that imposter syndrome comes, comes front and center a lot. And I think what we need to do is overcome that and be willing to take a challenge and take a risk and do something that maybe it doesn't work, or it does work, but you're still going to learn from it. And so I think it's really important that people go forward and try those different things. So the mistakes that I made, they're all in that book if anybody wants to read it. But but in addition, I think what I did was I relied on my work, my hard work, my productivity to speak for itself. And I didn't spend my time doing the networking that I needed to do. And I think what happened was that I relied too much on one part or one aspect of my career, and not too dissimilar to what Lori said, right? Like, you need to meet those different people and connect with those different people, because you don't know who's going to suddenly help you or have an opportunity. Like Lisa just said, hey, you want to work on something with me? And we just worked on it a couple of weeks ago, and it's great. But it's like, you just don't know who you're going to meet and who you're going to talk to and who's going to be your next collaborator. And so I think it is really important to network and to do much more. And so when an opportunity was given to me to have leadership, I felt like, oh, I don't have enough experience in that. I don't know what I'd be doing. And so there were a couple opportunities that I think, wow, I gave up early opportunities at leadership, and perhaps that would have changed my trajectory slightly in different ways. And perhaps I should have taken that risk, and I was reluctant to. And so what I would tell all of you is that sometimes, when a door opens, it's okay to take a leap. Like, it's all right. And you don't have to be so worried about it not working out, that things will happen and you will learn from it. And so even if it isn't the best job, it's okay. And Lori gave the example of she's going to Seattle and a whole load of stuff changed out of her control. All of these things happen all the time. So you just have to be willing to take a jump and decide that in general, it's a good idea, and be willing to take that risk.
Yeah. And Lisa, do you have an example you can give us as well?
Yeah, there are again many. I've made tons of mistakes in my life. They are all opportunities, though. I didn't write this one down as something to say, but I think in response to what Rulan just said, I think it's kind of interesting. So I did a master's with somebody, and it just wasn't really working out really well. I did end up finishing my master's with that particular person, but it was really, really challenging. And at one point, I just wanted to quit. And I was talking to my mother, and she said, was encouraging me not to quit, just keep at it. And I said, but Mom, I'm not learning anything. And she said, that's not true. You're learning how not to be a mentor. And I thought, wow, that's like reframing things in your mind sometimes is a really valuable tool. So what I wrote down was to say, a mistake I certainly still listen to sometimes is that voice in your head telling you that you're not good enough, which also I think touches on what Rulan was also saying as the theme, right? We all have imposter syndrome. If somebody tells you they don't, I don't believe it for a second. I think some people have some tools that they use to not show that imposter syndrome is there, but it is alive and well. And I think part of that is seeking perfection. And I think women tend to do this a little bit more. We, as Rulan said, we want to be like 100%. We don't apply for jobs because we're not 100% fill out all of that criteria that's in that job description. But that shouldn't stop us from applying for things, that we are taking that leap, taking that opportunity. And the other thing that I read very recently, which caused some reflection, was that there are mentors, right? You need to have that network. I really love that. Again, I was too slow in developing that network. But understand that some people around you, and I learned this a little later on in my career, was when I was offered an opportunity and I asked people about this opportunity, I had some team mentors, some people that sort of worked to not get me to accept some of those opportunities. And it took me a while to figure that out. But establishing that network and making sure they're not mentors is a really important tool, and try not to make that same mistake.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And on all three of your responses so far, I think it's really encouraging for trainees to hear that even so far along your career and as experts in the field, you deal with these really relatable issues as well, such as imposter syndrome. And so on that, what are some skills or knowledge you think young women's health professionals should cultivate now to best prepare them for a career in women's health research? And we can start with Lisa on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've got like a real science one, and then I have two other ones. How should I put it? So one would be just to be open, which I actually think somebody else has said too. I think it might have been Rulan or Lori, I can't remember both. Be open, because there's so much to learn from so many different disciplines, and just having that willingness to listen to other people and disciplines, even if it might not be exactly what you are interested in, I think is really great, because what happens, it also develops your network a little bit more, allows you to grow in many ways. So I think that being open is a really good skill to develop. Going to some random seminar in a conference that you might not have necessarily sat in, or at your university or academic institution. I think knowing how to analyze, this is my science bit, is really, really important. So I would encourage all the trainees out there to do, statistics. There's all sorts of free statistic stuff online. Any kind of big data, I think, is also great, even if that's not what you want to do, just learning about it and learning what artificial intelligence is. I think those are kinds of pieces of information, because you never know how that's going to reflect on your career. And then the last, not really a skill, so maybe I'll leave that one for my important takeaways. So I'll just leave it.
All right. And Lori or Rulan?
Yeah, I would say communication training is, especially in women's health, which is just chock full of misinformation and disinformation online. So if your university or institution offers media training, take it. Learn how to extract the key messages from your work, know how to give the 30-second, the 3-minute, and the 30-minute pitch, have them in your pocket ready to go. And then I would say also try and understand the bigger context of the work that you do. How does your particular question fit within bigger questions or related questions? So as an example, in my area of sexual dysfunction, really about developing treatments for sexual dysfunction, it's also really important for me to understand, the impacts, the economic impacts of having a sexual dysfunction or managing genital pain, impacts on fertility, impacts on relationship. And so having these, knowing the sort of connecting the dots between your particular area and other areas of health or well-being that maybe the public is also interested in. And then finally, so if you have opportunities to practice giving your pitch, whether to a public audience or if a foundation knocks on your door and asks you to present, I know a lot of you are on social media, TikTok, can you give your pitch in 8 seconds? And that really forces you to extract the key findings. I do think it's really important that we as scientists and researchers get into that online space, because the non-scientists are already out there sharing sharing disinformation. So that would be my encouragement.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Rulan?
So I think in terms of skills, I do think like we really talked about mostly soft skills. So I think I agree with Lisa, like some of the hard skills, like think about team science, recognize what your immediate skills that you learned, but what do you think the future is going to hold, so that you're at least skilled and understand, and recognize that really the big breakthroughs happen with team science. And so what would have been acceptable 10, 15 years ago, where it's the one lab, one person in the lab and everything's related to that one person, now we expect there to be more team science and more open science. And so it should become skilled at those kind of things. But it's really the soft skills that are going to enable you as you move forward to be able to balance all the things that you need to be able to think about work life. I call it imbalance. I don't think it's ever balanced. I think you sort of choose different things at different times. But it's the whole skills about, how do I answer this scientific question, and then I sort of say, so what? And then I have to now tell the story. So just like Lori said, you've got to become skilled about telling the story scientifically for your peers. You have to be able to tell the story for knowledge dissemination and for the lay person. And you've got to be able to communicate really clearly about what you're doing. And that elevator pitch, you know, it sounds so simple, but every time I meet a student and I say, so what do you do? It's like I get paragraphs and paragraphs, and I'm like, I don't know what they're really doing. And I think that I can't help you, or when somebody comes to speak to me, I just need to know, what are you doing? So then I can say, hey, these are the great things that you can do. And oh, I can help you with that. That would be really interesting. Let me connect you. But if I can't understand what you're doing, then it's really hard for me to be able to do that next step for you when I meet you. And I think that's one of the big things that everyone has trouble with. And I try to have my lab people not memorize it, but really write it out so that they can practice. And that's really an important thing that you can do. And networking, we always talked about, I think this idea also about sponsorship. So you have a mentor, but people will sponsor you for things. And I think it's thinking through, what are you being sponsored for? To review journal articles, to get onto a journal, to get on to become a speaker at a scientific meeting, all of these kind of things. So people need to know who you are, and you need to be present. And I think what's hard now is we're being asked to be present now, not just virtually, but also in person. And so I feel like we've got double the work going on, right? And that becomes complicated for people, especially if you've got young families. And so learning how to figure out that timing, I think, is something that people need to figure out in this world of hybrid, about what you can and cannot do, and trying to understand how to navigate that. And I think I'll leave it there for the moment, but those are sort of the takeaways. And I'd say go back to that book about the 12 steps. There are 12 things that you could learn, and they're all soft skills.
That's great. And again, opening up to all panelists, what are the most important takeaways you would say so far from your career in the women's health field? Anyone?
I'll do it. I'll jump in.
All right.
They're going to take away the great points, because they've already, I think we've touched upon a number of areas, and Rulan just mentioned one that was going to be the thing that I said, oh, I'm going to save it. And that is don't, and this is not really science-wise, I think it's just a rule for life anyway, and that is don't seek a work-life balance. It sounds like a great thing to seek and have, but there's no such thing. So part of probably the best advice I got when I first started, because I asked about, well, how do you achieve it? Somebody who was about 10 or 15 years ahead of me, and she said there's no such thing, and it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes, you have a grant due or a paper revisions or something, and you just can't pay attention to all the other things going on in your life. You've got to get that thing done. And then there'll be another time period where someone unfortunately will be sick in your family, and you can't do your work thing, and that's fine. That's just riding a roller coaster of life, and understanding that it's kind of an impossibility to seek that balance. So I would say don't seek it. Don't be too afraid of failures, because failures always tell us information, right? And follow your passion. If you're passionate about it, I mean, I know it's trite, but it does work. If you're passionate about something, it will never feel like a burden.
I'm happy to go next. Mine's really short and sweet, and that is you're making history. So really, with only a 20-year history of women routinely being included in clinical trials, with so many areas of women's health never studied, never funded, with so little information on the unique sex and gender aspects of certain conditions, it really is an amazing opportunity to make the next major discovery and be part of that history.
I would say have fun. Like, this is a great career. Like, I actually think you get to do all sorts of great, fun stuff. It's never boring. It's never the same. There's always something happening. And I would just say, I think that all of you have chosen what I think is a great area to go into. And I think that there's so much work that needs to be done. Really just enjoy yourself and have fun. And you are never going straight, but you're always moving forward, and that's good. And I think you're always challenging people and advocating and making change and like having impact. And I think that's really, really important. And so we want you all to stay in this area. We want you to really continue to advocate for women's health. We want you to advocate for more women researchers and more diverse researchers, and be an ally to people who you see who have a struggle or have not had the opportunities. And I think that it's enjoy yourself and really recognize that there are difficult times, but if you see it as an opportunity and reframe it, as we've all talked about, I think that you guys will have a great time and just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you. And I mentioned in the chat already, but if you do have any questions for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand, unmute, go on your video and ask a question, or you can leave them in the chat and I can ask them for you. And while we wait for, yes, go ahead.
Can I say one thing? I think it is important, obviously, I think it's important to have fun, but there are going to be some points where are not fun. So I'm just like a boring example of that is you get reviews back, or, you know, maybe written an editorial and they pick out that you don't like, you really liked it and you want to put it back. I don't know who
And I
would
guess, yeah, and I guess that's what I would say. Like, I actually think, you know, I used to take them so personally, but
Yeah,
somebody gave me some great advice. And that was, you get those reviews and you print them out 3 times. And the first one, you like stand all over it, stamp all over it, and just swear a lot and then throw it out. And the second one, you crumple it up, you read some of it, you crumple it up, you're so irritated, you throw it out again. And by that point, you're kind of calm. Maybe it's a couple of days later, then you read the third one and you take a look at it. Everyone goes through that. Everyone takes grant reviews personally. Everyone gets irritated.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's, you know what? I see it as it's not a life and death thing. It's irritating. No. So it's a growth opportunity. And you're like, all right, I didn't explain it properly. Some of it is luck. Some of it is luck. And so it happens and you just got to keep going. I had a friend who, I was junior faculty at Hopkins, and I had just done my first NIH Career Mentored Award, and I didn't get it. And I went and I cried on his shoulder, and I was like, you know, feeling sorry for myself. And he goes, listen, and he opens up this drawer that just looked enormous, this file drawer. And he goes, these are all the grants I haven't gotten. I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, and you're complaining about one. Got it. I got it. I'll just keep quiet. I was like, I'll keep quiet. And so I think the thing is that everybody goes through this. And so you just need to learn how to not take it personally. And it's not you as the person, it's
but I would say I
the
still,
random grant reviewer, you know what I mean?
Personally, it still pisses me off. But what I try to do is I have a different coping strategy. I haven't put it out 3 times, but I think that's a good one. And you're absolutely right. We shouldn't take it personally, but I still do because I'm, you know, cotton-headed ninny nuggets. I don't know. But I will have a pity party for myself, or like you said, like go and cry. I don't necessarily go and cry. I'll walk the dog. I'll be mad. I'll be angry. I'll cry. I'll do whatever. 24 hours. I give myself 24 hours. And then I set to like, okay. And I do sometimes answer it with like, well, you idiot. If you didn't think about it, and then don't push send.
Yeah.
Don't push send. But then I, you know, once I calm down, I can start analyzing the problem at hand.
I've always wanted to do a grant review or grant resubmission with a little bubble about this is what I'm really thinking in the sentence that I really you know what I mean? It was like kind of hidden there somewhere, but or I wanted to do something that was like same with journal review articles, right? Like or like when you're sending back reviews back. Like
just don't accidentally upload the wrong copy.
Don't send it. In fact, do it on a complete sheet of paper and don't copy and paste and don't put an email and don't blind copy. Yeah.
I just saw something, it was a TikTok thing or something, but it was on Instagram about what women say, but what they really mean. And like
that's exactly it, right?
That's what we need. We need to do that, but for
well, thank you so much for these insightful comments. What we really want to say is something completely different. But you know, it's okay. Like I think that's the thing. I think when I stopped taking it so personally, I was like, yeah, whatever. Like it's a grant. It's okay. We're used to it. And to be honest, it makes you resilient. And when I see people, especially during COVID, and there was resiliency issues about people being challenged or what was interesting was I think a lot of the scientists are like, yeah, we're used to being told things all the time. And so you actually become pretty resilient at recognizing like, what's really meaningful to you in your North Star and like what you value. And so that you don't get so distracted by all that other stuff, right?
Exactly.
I see we have a question from Katrina, if you want to unmute and ask.
Hi there. Thanks, everybody. This has been kind of touched on already, but I think maybe elaborating a little bit, going to a slightly darker place. How have you dealt with toxic people who are in positions of power that are like basically trying to, like the anti-mentor, trying to thwart you and
Yeah. Sometimes I've left the institution. That's a little drastic. You might not be able to do that every time. You know, going around people, trying to not take it personally, but when they are anti-mentors, yeah, the way I've dealt with it is by trying to go around the situation, like trying to find another path. And sometimes it meant for me, and I'm sure other people have other ideas, but sometimes it meant for me to take on more than I really wanted to take on. So when I was talking about that opportunity, I took one on and I thought I was going to get something taken off my plate, and it didn't get taken. So an anti-mentor just said, no, you can't, basically you can't do that. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's going to add to my plate, but I want to push past. And to be honest, that opportunity did lead to more things. So I think it was the right decision at the end of the day. And if it wasn't, you know, if it hadn't moved that way, I don't know that it would have hurt me too badly. I just would have realized, oh, that's too much for me. But yeah, that's what because it's, some people are so toxic, you can't really do too much except for sidestep them, try to carve them out, but that's sometimes not possible, or sidestep them.
Yeah, that's an awful situation to be in, and not directly answering the question, Katrina, but just want to really highlight the importance of your mentorship circles. And so, you know, I belong to a mentorship group that meets once a month of other female faculty who are not in my department, who have no bearing on my promotion and awards, and it is a complete cone of silence place where we can just completely support one another and share story instances like this. And sometimes, you know, it's a source of great insights. It's also a source of great validation as well. So if those types of mentorship circles don't exist, ours doesn't exist in a formal way, we just pulled it together. I'd encourage you to seek to create one.
Yeah, I was just going to say something, like you need to create allies that you have that are trusted people that you can go to really talk about it and really get some face validity about like your concerns and are they right, are they wrong, and you really need to get that feedback. Sometimes then you need to actually deal with the person itself directly, and that's really hard and really complicated. And that I've done actually sometimes in support with HR, and really sitting down and asking them, so, you know, this is my perception of what you're doing. I don't think that's what you intend. However, this is how I'm taking it. And that was actually great. HR gave me a bunch of tools to use and sort of to talk to them. Sometimes though, if you're at a trainee at somebody higher, you may feel vulnerable. There may not be that you can actually approach something a certain way. And what I think is important is that you really have to then think about strategies about talking to other people, especially if you're in the middle of your PhD or you're trying to finish it, or you think that somebody's putting a barrier. I think it's important to figure out how you can address that directly, but probably bring in other people to support you and talk to you about that. I think that is one of the hardest things if you're on your own, and trying to make sure that you should gather a group to help you is the biggest thing going forward. And work with friends. It's so much more fun when you work with friends.
thanks.
And we have a few people who also have questions, I think. Feel free to go ahead.
I think Leonette had a question.
Oh, I don't think we can hear you.
Can't hear you though, if you're talking.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Great, sorry. So great conversation, guys. I love the discussion. This is more so geared towards Lori. She brought it up, but if anybody could answer it. I have three questions, two about anti-LGBT efforts, and then my last question is what role do men play in this discussion? So for Lori, I said in recent times we see anti-LGBT legislation globally and pride protests locally here in Toronto, particularly where I'm located. Can you talk a little bit more about how the political landscape affects research and healthcare? So you spoke about how that affected your grant. And then how can our research have impactful change to counteract anti-LGBT policies? So those are the two questions for the LGBT Pride Month question. And then my question, another personal one, is what role do men play in these discussions on women's health, seeing that when I enter these rooms, usually one of one or one of one of one of one when it comes down to intersectionalities of things. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for being here. And, you know, I think your presence answers the second question. And that is, you know, as women's health researchers, we also have to make room for men, gender diverse people, allies, other people who really have an important voice in this. And so thank you for being here. Yeah, I think, you know, your first question around, first of all, the atrocities that are happening around anti-LGBTQ plus populations and the very appropriate protests that are ensuing is, you know, I think it's really inspiring to see those protests, but it's also very disheartening to know that they're necessary given the given the legislation. And we can think of countless other examples, you know, threats to reproductive justice that are not just threats in the U.S. but are threats to us in Canada. And for me, as someone who does research on within these circles, it really speaks to the importance of, I think what I touched on in my first question is your relationships. And I know when I was first told as an early academic, pick up your phone, call your MP, know your MLA, make sure they know your name, make sure they know where you live. I sort of dismissed that at the beginning, and over time, and especially as I took on a leadership role and actually saw firsthand the importance of having those connections to government, you know, municipal, provincial, federal, then I started doing that much more, and especially around election time. And so for students, I would say the same thing. Make sure your local representatives know you, know the importance of the work that you do, so that when they go to their tables, they have those stats and figures on hand and can lobby. Make sure that you're voting, make sure that everyone votes, and you know, vote for people who support equity, who support science. There's a underway on the next president of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. I don't know what input we're all going to have, but this also is going to be an important vote that could steer the future of funding in equitable women's health, et cetera. So I think, yeah, knowing your political landscape and not being afraid to make those connections would be really important. I'll stop there and maybe turn it to Lisa and Rulan about the second question.
The being an ally, I think you're doing the right thing. I mean, thank you. And I know, you know, I think having you here and listening is super important, and having you voice how to be an ally. It's one of the best things we can do for any kind of anti, you know, bias that you can do, is to be an ally. It works a lot better than anti-bias training, apparently, is allyship. So just recognizing injustice, speaking up around it. I don't do LGBTQ or 2S LGBTQ research, but recently we looked at CIHR grants. It's coming out, it should be coming out really quick, really soon, biology of sex differences. And of course we wanted to look at it from a women's health perspective, which we did, but we also looked at it from a 2S LGBT2 perspective, because having, what I was going to write about that was about having the data to support that actually this isn't true. LGBTQ parents are just as good as, opposite sex parent, just ridiculous stuff like that comes out in those political. It's really hard to talk about some of this, absolutely, but in science circles, it's not just in science circles, it's just so important to talk about it anyway. But scientists generally listen to data, and eventually politicians will listen to data and evidence. And so it's just not necessarily being afraid, but doing it at your own pace too, I think is also important. And, sort of, I don't want to, knowing when to speak up and when maybe just sit back and listen, I think is also, that's challenging. I mean, I find it really, really challenging often in this space. But I'm also really willing to listen to not all perspectives, but most perspectives, understand where people are coming from. That's another thing, just sometimes very valuable to sit back and take a listen. But yeah, getting the data and speaking up and being an ally, I think is just great. Even just standing there. I think one of the best things for an ally is just to stand in between the accuser and the person, not even necessarily saying anything, just even if you don't stand in between, you just stand beside. Rulan, I bet you have some great things.
I was just going to say, I think of women's researchers and women in general really understand the need for being an ally and raising awareness about equity deserving communities, right? And I think that it's a natural allyship and alignment, and we want to advocate for everybody. And so I'd say everything that Lori and Lisa said, advocacy and allyship, super important, and we just need to keep at it. About you being here, I think all men who do research in science should be also women's health researchers. I think that our advocacy that we're going to go forward, the three of us have been talking about, is we really want people to, when you study Alzheimer's, that you study it by sex, that you address these kind of issues that are going on, and you need to study by sex and gender, right? And so I think that that's something that we want everybody to do. So I'm glad that you're here. 1%, we need another 99% to come and join us. And the idea is that we really advocate for them. And I think what I've realized is a lot of people think about women's health and they kind of put it in like it's an other sort of group. And I think what we need to say is it's so vital because it's everybody who's out there. So when you think about heart disease, when you think about Alzheimer's, when you think about multiple sclerosis, when you think about rheumatologic disorders, when you think about kidney disease, there's no reason why everybody who does research is not also a women's health researcher. And I think it's trying to get that advocacy. And so we clearly have a long way to go, but I think that it can change in the way that we've talked about data is necessary from the Black community, from the Indigenous communities. And then, so we just keep advocating that we need data. And so ultimately it'll happen. We just got to keep pushing.
Can I just say one other thing is it takes a village. So we need you, right? You need us, we need you. I think if we can link, I know it's very kumbaya of me to say that, but linking arms and being together, I think is really, really important, because that's how we're going to get further together.
Yes, absolutely. And it is time to wrap up the panel discussion, but of course, these are really important discussions that we're happy to have continue online and offline and in our future events. And so if everyone can just join me in giving a virtual applause to all our panelists today. And thank you again so much for your time, Lisa, Lori, and Rulan. And with that, I'll pass it back to Catherine to introduce our next session.
Thank you all. We're just going to take away the spotlight so I can see everybody. There we go. Okay, now I'm seeing all of your faces. Thank you so much, Lori, Rulan, and Lisa. That was incredibly insightful, and I want to do that again because I was listening very keenly. One thing that I wrote down for myself, a key message that I heard across all three of you is network and do it early. Build up your network early in your career. View failures as opportunities and be adaptable. Let your passions guide you throughout your career. So thank you so much for all of that. So now we're going to move into our first oral presentation session. And I want to welcome our judges who have been joining us for the past 15 minutes roughly to listen to the last bit of that talk. I'd like to remind the judges that we'll ask you to provide your scores via direct message to Avani Dunna after every presentation. And please include their names because we'll be recording your scores and reporting them at the end of the day. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and message Avani or myself in the chat. All right, so we're ready to begin with the very first presentation. I'm going to ask Alexandra to go ahead and share your screen. We should have given you access as a co-host. If not, Avani could please, or Bonnie, go ahead and give Alexandra access to co-host as I introduce her. Okay, so Alexandra is a graduate student in psychology at the University of Quebec in Montreal. Outside of her training to become a clinical psychologist, she's doing her PhD in psychoneuroendocrinology under the supervision of Dr. Marie-France Mirin. Alexandra is interested in women's health, particularly in how sex hormones can shape the brain and influence mental health. Her thesis focuses on the potential long-term effects of oral contraceptives and on brain morphology related to fear processing. And if you know Alexandra, she looks very calm. She's very studious in her appearance, but in her free time, she actually enjoys hardcore music and moshing at rock shows, which I think is very, very cool. Welcome, Alexandra, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Is my screen okay? Great.
Yeah, it looks great.
Perfect. So, well, hi, everyone. I'm actually really happy to be here to talk about my thesis on fear and oral contraceptives. So to begin with, why should we be interested in fear? We know that it's a universal and adaptive emotion, but it can become pathological, and this is what characterizes anxiety disorders and PTSD. And dysfunctions resulting from poor fear regulation can manifest in different ways, such as hypervigilance, worry, and avoidance. But clinical treatments targeting these symptoms focus on exposure, which is a behavioral approach based on the concept of fear extinction. And extinction is basically a safety learning that promotes the reduction of fear in the face of an anxiety-provoking stimulus. And we know that women are twice at risk of suffering from fear-related psychopathologies. And interestingly, scientific attention allocated to topics related to women enabled to connect endocrine activity to anxiety. So we know that low endogenous levels of estradiol, either naturally occurring during the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle or induced by hormonal contraceptive use, appear to be a key contributor to fear maintenance as studied by fear conditioning and extinction protocols. And at the brain level, sex hormones are known to modulate a network implicated in fear processes. And the fear circuitry consists of several regions like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus that are known to be dense in sex hormone receptors. And on the other hand, oral contraceptives, or OCs, are one of the most widespread sex hormone disruptors worldwide, and they are generally initiated during adolescence, which is a sensitive period for brain development. And studies have shown that OC use was associated with reduction in gray matter volume of subcortical structures, but also in cortical thickness of prefrontal areas. And some other studies have suggested that there would be effects related to OCs even after having stopped their use, such as for anxiety symptoms during the pandemic, as our team reported higher symptoms in current and past users compared to never users on a one-year period during the COVID. But the same kind of analysis was also performed on brain morphology and cognitive functions of perimenopausal women. However, no study has investigated the current and lasting impact of OCs on the fear circuitry, so that's what we aim to do. And more specifically, to support the hypothesis of long-lasting neuroanatomical effects, we expected past OC users to resemble current OC users and differ from never users. So to do that, we recruited 4 LT groups of adults that were either current users, past users, never users, and men. And we had a lot of criteria, but just to keep it short, our current and past users only used combined OCs during their lifetime, and naturally cycling women, so past and never users, were expected to have a regular menstrual cycle, so we could schedule study sessions either during the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle when sex hormones are low, or during the pre-ovulatory phase when estradiol levels are high. And we collected structural MRI data and extracted gray matter volumes and cortical thickness of peer-related regions of interest. And essentially, the difference between the two is that cortical thickness measures the distance between the white matter and gray matter surfaces, while volume is a 3D measure of the space occupied by gray matter. And historically, more studies have used this metric. But it's important to know that a larger volume can be explained by several things, while thickness is more specific, hence the importance of studying both phenotypes. So for the results, volumetry analyses revealed a group effect for the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or the DACC. And as you can see, irrespective of their contraceptive history, women exhibited a larger DACC compared to men. And for the cortical thickness analyses, a group effect was found for the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or the VMPFC. And as represented far right, current OC users had a reduced cortical thickness compared to men on this region. And interestingly, we found that this result was driven by users of OCs with lower doses of ethinyl estradiol, or EE, which is the synthetic estrogenic compound in combined OCs. So to sum it all up, we first reported a sex-specific difference in the DACC, which is a region implicated in fear expression. And this finding aligns with the literature and suggests that sex hormones would exert organizational effects so that they were influential in early stages of development before the endocrine disruption caused by OCs. But of course, as we study humans, it's possible that other societal factors, non-hormonal factors may have influenced the results as gender, obviously. We also showed an atrophic effect of current OC used on the VMPFC thickness, and particularly for formulations of low EE doses. And given that endogenous estradiol is suppressed by any kind of OCs, our results suggest that only low EE intake of 10 to 25 micrograms may lead to an underactivation of estrogen receptors. So basically putting women in a hypoestrogenic state, which would prevent cortical trophic effect of estrogenic activity. And we also know that the VMPFC sustains fear regulation, as thickness of this region has been linked to better extension. So taking together these findings could possibly represent structural vulnerability to anxiety, and in particular, OC use could exacerbate this vulnerability specific to women. And finally, our results support that OC's effect would be reversible since no effect was observed in past users. However, it's possible that other OC parameters, such as the duration of use or the age of onset, may be relevant to the discovery of lasting effects. And it may also be the case with the use of other techniques, such as fMRI or connectivity during a fear regulation task. So with that, I would like to just thank my lab supervisor, Marie-France Marin, and the STEAM Lab, as well as all our funders. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. That was wonderful. I have to move us along. If you have questions for Alexandra, please keep them in your back pocket. We have a Q&A session at the end of the conference today where you can ask any of the presenters, any of the poster presenters questions. Alexandra also has a poster presentation, so she'll be in the virtual space with us there where you can ask. So at this time, judges, I'll ask you to please send a direct message to Avani with a score in between 2 to 10 for Alexandra. So on to our next presenter, we have Dr. Caitlin Zaki-Metier. And I just want to ask, Caitlin, is that the correct pronunciation of your name?
Very close, yeah, it's Caitlin Zaki-Matias.
Matthias, okay. So we next have Dr. Caitlin Zaki-Matias, who's going to be presenting for us. She is a fourth-year diagnostic radiology resident and incoming chief resident at Trinity Health Oakland Hospital, Wayne State University School of Medicine in Pontiac, Michigan. She serves on the Radiological Society of North American Radiographics Trainee Editorial Advisory Board, as a trainee representative on the Canadian Society of Breast Imaging Board of Directors, and on several working groups in the Canadian Association of Radiologists. She has special interests in breast and gynecologic imaging, quality improvement, undergraduate medical education, and mentorship. And Caitlin probably knows quite a few people around the world because she's lived in 4 countries since 2015. That is a lot of admin work to do outside of your regular job, but I hope that it was adventurous and satisfying for you. Welcome, Caitlin, and take it away.
Thank you. I'm just unable to share my screen yet.
Oh, okay. I can fix that for you.
Thank you.
There we go.
All right. Is everything displaying correctly?
It looks great.
Perfect. So thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm very excited to be here and share this work on behalf of myself and my wonderful team who's listed here. So I'll be talking about our study, correlation between breast arterial calcifications and higher cardiovascular risk, awareness, attitudes amongst Canadian radiologists who report mammography. So disclosure that was already mentioned, I am on the Canadian Society of Breast Imaging Board of Directors who did sponsor this study and supported the survey. So to start with some background, cardiovascular disease is the second leading cause of premature death in women in Canada, which is actually second to breast cancer in women aged 40 to 49. And the majority of Canadian women are unaware of their personal risk. Conventional screening tools such as the Framingham Risk Score have been shown to underestimate cardiovascular risk in women, thought to be due to the lack of sex-specific risk factors such as those listed on the slide here. And overall, as has been a theme, is that women's health and cardiovascular health is no exception, is underdiagnosed, undertreated, and under-researched. So breast arterial calcifications, BAC, have been shown to correlate with an increased risk of adverse cardiac events. And these calcifications range on about 10 to 12% in healthier younger women, up to 60-70% in older women. So the provincial and territorial screening programs across Canada offer screening mammography every 1 to 2 years, depending on age and risk status. So this presents a unique opportunity. If we can detect BAC on screening mammograms, we may have the opportunity to identify women with a higher cardiovascular risk at an earlier age before they become symptomatic. And here I just have an image. So on the left side of the screen here is a mammogram, medial lateral oblique view. And zoomed in here, we can see these course, what we call in radiology, tram track calcifications along the course of a vessel in the upper breast. And then on the right side of the screen, we have a non-contrast CT. We can see some dense calcifications in the left anterior descending artery, as well as some calcifications here in the left circumflex artery. Surveys have been conducted in Europe and the US regarding radiologist awareness and reporting of BAC on mammography reports. And those studies did find that a majority of European radiologists are aware of the association and do routinely report their presence, as well as American radiologists. So our study aimed to evaluate the awareness of Canadian radiologists who report mammography of the clinical significance of BAC, their attitudes towards reporting such, and we compared this to their European and American counterparts. So we put together a voluntary anonymous 25-question survey, which we distributed via SurveyMonkey last spring. And we distributed it to Canadian radiologists via various national and provincial radiology associations. And the survey here we can see was broadly split into 3 parts. So the first part was demographic information and practice information of the respondents. The second part was truly the most important part of the survey, which was gauging their awareness of the association between BAC and cardiovascular risk, as well as their reporting habits, and if they had any opinions on local or national policies on BAC reporting. And finally, out of curiosity, we asked if the likelihood of reporting BAC would be altered as a result of them taking this survey in the future. So we had received 186 complete responses, majority of which were from board certified radiologists. And here we can see the highest number of respondents was from Ontario and Quebec, with decent representation from BC and Alberta as well. And most respondents worked in a community hospital setting. And just this table, I've highlighted the options in which the majority chose that selection. So were you previously aware of the association between BAC and increased cardiovascular risk? 60%, a majority of the respondents were aware. However, 46% did not routinely report their presence on mammograms. And again, did not make any mention of the severity, so mild, moderate, or severe burden of calcification. And then finally, the majority of respondents did only include this in the findings or the body section of the radiology report and not in the impression or conclusion. So again, we asked them if they would be more inclined to mention BAC in a younger patient, which we identified as younger than 50 years of age, and most said that they would, but however, they would not compare the progression of calcification compared to prior mammograms. And in terms of clinical implications, the majority of our radiologist respondents indicated they would not verbally inform the patient of the presence of BAC or the association with cardiovascular risk. They would not further delve into the chart to check for the patient's personal or family history, and they would not make any specific recommendations on follow-up or referral based on the presence of BAC on mammography. And we did ask, we left some text or comment boxes for open text, and we found a few of our respondents did say that they've received correspondence from referring physicians to further discuss BAC and their significance and what the next steps should be. Only 4% or 7 of our respondents indicated that their practice does currently have standards on reporting BAC, and the majority, 82%, agreed that a national guideline on BAC reporting would be of benefit. And as a result of this survey, just over half indicated that they would be more likely to report on BAC in the future. So in comparison to the European and American survey studies that have been done in the past, fewer Canadian radiologists were aware of the association between BAC and cardiovascular risk, fewer reported the presence of BAC on mammography, fewer informed the patient of the presence of BAC, and fewer provided management recommendations. So what are the implications of BAC reporting? Well, at present, there's no consensus on whether that BAC reporting should be standard practice in Canada. And given the evidence linking BAC to increased risk, there are benefits to reporting such information. However, the impact of mandatory reporting should also be considered. So this would require a collaborative multidisciplinary approach to making BAC reporting guidelines and subsequent management recommendations, as such reporting has the potential to increase the burden on our already stretched healthcare system. And, with patients getting the results via electronic medical record now, before having the opportunity to speak with their physician, this may cause some patient anxiety if they're not able to get further information in a timely manner. So the Canadian Society of Breast Imaging designed these guidelines in terms of reporting BAC. So it's a scoring system from 0 to 3, 0 being no calcifications and 3 being the most severe burden, as well as a suggested script for radiologists to include in the report. And as a companion, the CSBI also came up with this suggested patient communication here on the right-hand side of the screen to be included in the report so that patients who do have access to their mammogram results prior to discussing with their doctor can have a little bit more information. And there have been studies done surveys of patients that were performed that indicate patients do want to know about BAC. They want to be informed and that they would act on this information. So ultimately, it comes down to autonomy, informed discussion, and shared decision-making. So some limitations of our study: we had selection bias, which we attempted to minimize by distributing the survey very widely amongst radiologists in Canada. Response bias was hopefully minimized by anonymizing the survey. And then we were unable to ascertain the true response rate based on our distribution methods. So we estimate about 46% response based on prior studies on radiologist demographics in Canada. And finally, in conclusion, Canadian radiologists who report mammography are less aware of the association between BAC and cardiovascular risk compared to European and American radiologists. They were also less likely to document their presence on mammography. However, given the correlation of BAC with increased cardiovascular risk, there is an increased need for awareness as well as national reporting and management guidelines. And this presents an opportunity for radiologists to add value in patients' care. Beyond breast cancer screening, we may also be able to add value in terms of cardiovascular risk prevention. Here are references. And with that, I'd like to thank you. If you would like to see the full article that was published in the Canadian Association of Radiologists Journal, you can scan the QR code up top here.
Thank you, Caitlin. That's good research, but I'm a little concerned to hear the results, to be honest with you. Oh no, I would rather my my healthcare practitioner to tell me, but anyways, I'm curious, what's next for you with this project?
So we are actually just wrapping up. We're doing a complimentary survey of referring physicians in Canada on their awareness. So family doctors, gynecologists, obstetricians, internists, oncologists. We're sending this survey to all of them and seeing what's their awareness of breast arterial calcifications. What would they do if they received a mammogram report for their patient that said that they had these calcifications and maybe it increased cardiovascular risk? So that's the next step, is to see what the referring doctors in Canada, what their perspectives are.
Mm-hmm. And is there an overarching goal? Like, do you have like a 15-year plan for like a vision that you're moving towards?
So simultaneously, radiologists from the Canadian Society of Breast Imaging and the Canadian Society for Thoracic Radiology are collaborating with family doctors, oncologists, surgeons. We are working on making some guidelines so that radiologists have standard reporting guidelines for breast arterial calcifications, but also that if we put this information out there, that the referring physicians and other healthcare practitioners know what to do with it. So we're working on putting together both reporting and management guidelines.
Yeah. And just thinking back to the expert panel discussion, like I feel like you've got a lot of work ahead of you. If this is the guidelines, you want to have them implemented and you want to improve the practice, I think that this is a great career path for you to start building that network around you, right? And tapping into that passion and to being determined and to persevere through any setbacks. But I wish you the best of luck in doing that. And please stay connected with us. I'd love to hear more about how this project continues to progress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
We have about 5 minutes before our first break. If anybody has questions for Saiful or any of the other poster presenters, you're welcome to raise your hand, pop it in the chat, or just go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask. I'm going to pause for a second to see if anyone has a question. Yeah, let's go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I want to appreciate the presenters for the 3 beautiful presentations. I think they were very informative. I had a question for Alexandra. I wanted to know what are the clinical implications for her research, knowing that oral contraceptives are taken by millions of women in the world? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It's an important one. So based on our study, it's important to know that we had an LT sample, so it's difficult to evaluate the clinical significance as we use a cross-sectional design. I think it's informative and given the novelty of this research, but we also think that it's important to investigate the brain morphology prospectively to better understand the directionality of these effects. So yeah, I think that it's kind of difficult based on our first of all, yeah, so for the cycle length, we basically went for reports from women. So we had what their subjective mean of length, cycle length. And we were able to assess sex hormone levels using saliva samples, using mass spectrometries to quantify the concentrations. So we were able to see if we targeted the right menstrual cycle phase, which was the case, and just to precise on the cycle length, I don't recall exactly the minimal and maximal cycle days that we use, but it's pretty like standard, like I don't know, maybe like 25 to 35 days, something like that. And we had a mean of 29.5 in our sample. So I don't know if that answers.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Once again, I'm Tamil Kendall, and I'm the Director of Power, and I have the privilege of welcoming you. I am also on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. Back to this second set of trainee oral presentations. So we're going to kick it off with Bryn. So Bryn, please turn on your camera. Welcome. Bryn is a graduate student in the Women and Children's Health Sciences at UBC, and she's working with Dr. Nicole Fairbrother at the Perinatal Anxiety Lab and looking at perinatal mental health conditions. And she shared with us that her Baba, her grandmother, does ancestry research and once told her that their family is related to Shania Twain, the very famous Canadian country star who I am going to see in November, and I'm absolutely thrilled about it.
Lucky.
I know, very happy. So welcome, Bryn, and she is going to give a talk on the role of sleep in predicting postpartum OCD, and we will have an opportunity to ask Bryn some questions at the end. Please go ahead, Bryn.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And yeah, very excited that you are going to be seeing Shania. Tell her I said hi. Hi, everybody. My name is Bryn, and today I'm going to be speaking about some of my thesis work looking at the role of sleep in predicting postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder. So to start off, obsessive compulsive disorder is characterized by obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are repetitive, unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, and impulses that come to mind and usually cause a lot of distress, whereas compulsions are behaviors or actions done in response to those obsessions, usually to avoid the distress and make someone feel better. And so postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder, as the name suggests, is OCD that occurs during the postpartum period, and it's characterized by rapid onset following childbirth. And it's unique in that the fact that the obsessions and the compulsions are primarily around the infant. And so usually because there's some very upsetting content in those thoughts, it's commonly concealed from healthcare practitioners and other support systems. And so this has a really large negative impact for not only the mother and the birthing person who is experiencing it, but also for the developing infant and the family unit as a whole. And so researchers have identified some risk factors that have been linked to increased risk of postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder. This includes prematurity, giving birth to your first child, giving birth via cesarean section, having a history of mental health conditions, and experiencing both pregnancy and birthing complications. And so based on the literature surrounding OCD in the general population, as well as the literature looking at sleep and mental health in perinatal populations, I am proposing that sleep is also a part of this risk factor, and it maybe is a predictor of postpartum OCD. So that brings me to my questions. First of all, I'm looking at if reduced prenatal sleep quality predicted more severe postpartum obsessive compulsive symptoms, and then looking specifically into postpartum OCD, diagnosis of OCD, and what the relationship is between prenatal sleep and a postpartum OCD diagnosis. So I did this using data from a prospective cohort study. Participants who were eligible, they were recruited through the entire province of British Columbia using hospital, community, and rural recruitment. And we assessed them across 3 time points during the perinatal period, during pregnancy and the postpartum, prenatally around 33 weeks gestation, and then twice postpartum at around 9 weeks and 20 weeks postpartum, which is about 5 months. For actually the measures that I will be using, we looked both at the questionnaire data and the interview data for this work. So sleep quality was measured using the self-report measure of the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, or the PSQI, and OC symptoms were measured using the Dimensional Obsessive Compulsive Scale, or the DOCS. And then for interview data, we utilized the structural clinical interview for the DSM-5, also known as the SCID, and that was to collect information on obsessive compulsive severity and symptoms that fit full criteria for an OCD diagnosis. So when we look at the characteristics of the population, as you can see here, this is the sleep scores shown in orange, with worse sleep actually representative of that higher scale. And then we have the DOCS, or the OC symptoms, shown in the blue. And so interestingly, OC symptoms were actually decreasing as the perinatal period progressed. So they were reported the greatest, worst OC symptoms in the prenatal period, decreasing to the later postpartum. And then when we look at sleep, the early postpartum period had the worst quality sleep reported, which is what we expected with the literature. And so that does line up with what we know. And then when we look at actually a diagnosis of OCD from the interview data, we can see here the prenatal period did not have a very high frequency. About 20 people fit diagnostic criteria for full or subclinical OCD. And then we had a really sharp increase to about 63 people meeting that criteria for an OCD diagnosis. And then it later decreased. And so what we really wanted to look at if prenatal sleep quality actually predicted some of the severe OC symptoms that we were seeing. And so through linear regression, we found that this was the case, that poor prenatal sleep quality predicted both early and later postpartum OC severity. And this was accounted for around 13, as you can see, 13 to 15%. And that was just looking at the OC symptoms. And so then also wanting to consider diagnostic status, because that is a really important part of OCD, and a lot of people utilize the healthcare system when they are diagnosed or reaching severe enough clinical severity. And so we looked here at how prenatal sleep differed between those who either met criteria for a full or subclinical OCD diagnosis compared to those that didn't, shown in the blue. And so at both postpartum time points, we can see that prenatal sleep quality differed significantly, with those who later were diagnosed with OCD reporting significantly worse quality sleep. So when we looked into this further, just to see if there was a specific aspect of sleep that maybe was to explain or kind of causing more substantial explanation of this relationship. We looked and saw that about 5 of the 7 subscales that the PSKI measures were significantly worse when we looked at those people with postpartum OCD. So they reported significantly worse sleep overall, subjectively, sleep latency, how long it took them to fall asleep, sleep efficiency, sleep disturbances, as well as later daytime function. So from this, I concluded that women and birthing people experiencing reduced sleep quality during pregnancy may be at a higher risk for experiencing postpartum OCD. And so this is really important when we think about a population that maybe is more vulnerable and more at risk to experiencing these symptoms. We can identify them earlier and focus treatment and symptom management towards those people that need those resources. This also helps identify another risk factor for postpartum OCD that maybe can explain the high prevalence that we see in the postpartum period, and ultimately to help treatment and clinicians kind of focus the management in order for women and birthing people to experience the best postpartum experience that they can. I would like to thank my supervisor, Nicole, for her contribution, as well as my committee members and the people listed on this slide. And yeah, I have my email there if anyone wants to email me comments or questions, or I'll take some now if there's time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bryn. And I would ask folks, you can either put up your hand and then I'll acknowledge you, and you can unmute, or you can add questions for Bryn in the chat. I'll start off with one, Bryn. So when you said that this research can be very useful both for focusing treatment and management of OCD towards those that might be most at risk, can you also speak to us a little bit about the available treatment on the sleep side? So what would you be recommending to those women and parents who are experiencing sleep disturbance?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely kind of the progression of how we think about this. And so one of the most effective treatments for both actually OCD as well as sleep is CBT. And there is an insomnia specific cognitive behavioral therapy that has been proven to be very effective, especially even a small session, quick one-time session has actually had very, very positive results. And so that's kind of where we think that can kind of be implemented, controlling the sleep more during the prenatal period while you have more of that control versus after, when baby comes and there's so many other factors considering, kind of to really take advantage of that prenatal time and trying to make sure that your sleep is the best so that it can benefit you in the postpartum as well.
Great, thank you. So
Thank you.
opportunities for early intervention.
Exactly, yeah.
Katrina, please.
Thanks so much, Bryn. Really interesting work. I was just curious if you'd looked at some more of the predictors in the logistic regression, and just sort of thinking about that high rate that you saw of OC symptoms, not diagnoses, but symptoms in the prenatal period. And, you know, is there evidence for a little bit of a cycle, maybe, that those symptoms are disrupting sleep and then kind of spiraling, which would be, you know, both would be really amenable to that CBT intervention, but just out of interest.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I looked first at the doing a linear regression model with just the risk factors that we had access to, it wasn't actually a very strong predictor or a predictive model of OC symptoms. And that was mostly, I was looking specifically at postpartum OC symptoms. And so, yeah, that's interesting in itself. I think that there were some other aspects for example, mental health history that we didn't have access to, so that wasn't included in the predictive model. So I think that's a really big part of it. And then interestingly enough, when I was looking at the data and I noticed that prenatal had the highest rates or the worst quality OC symptoms, and I thought that was very interesting too. And I think that speaks more to the measure that we use, because the DOCS is like a general measurement for OC symptoms. So it's in the general population, it's used for everyone, it's not perinatal specific. And so I think that that more so shows that it's maybe not picking up on the perinatal specific symptoms that are actually associated with perinatal or postpartum OC symptoms, whereas the SCID and the diagnostic interview, our study team kind of tailored to really probe for those sides. And so I think that that's kind of why we wanted to include both, so that we included like more of the perinatal specific OCD as well. Yeah, great question.
Really interesting, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Pointing again to the importance of using the right diagnostic tools for the population, whether that's because of sex or because of gender or because of female specific life experiences, such as pregnancy or menopause or menstruation. There are more questions coming in, and we are coming over time, but perhaps, Bryn, you can answer. There's great questions both from Eleanor and Melina about the bi-directional relationship between OCD and sleep, and also a question about the remission rate in this population. So if you could answer those directly in the chat, that would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryn. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Mi-Jin Park, who is, I'm sorry, Mi-Jin is not yet a doctor. Perhaps she's going in that direction. We shall see.
I was, but not yet.
She is doing a master's in science at McMaster's University's Maraca Perinatal Epidemiology Research Lab, Pearl. And she also began her academic journey at U of T, where she majored in neuroscience and health studies with a minor in Buddhism, psychology, and mental health. So clearly a holistic approach. She's going to present a study of Asian and white disparities in obstetric anal sphincter injury, which is a systematic review and a meta-analysis. And something personal about Mi-Jin is that she was born in Japan and raised in South Korea and immigrated to Canada when she was 11 years old. Thank you very much and welcome, Mi-Jin.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Just give me 1 second while I figure out. All right, how is that looking? Good, okay.
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Like I said, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Mi-Jin Park and I'm a Master's of Science candidate at McMaster University. And I am training at the Maraca Perinatal Epidemiology Research Lab. Today I will be presenting my systematic review and meta-analysis on Asian white disparities in obstetric anal sphincter injury. So let's get started. What is obstetric anal sphincter injury, also known as OASI? OASI is the aggregation of 3rd and 4th degree perineal lacerations. So 3rd degree lacerations involve the external anal sphincters and or the internal anal sphincters, while the 4th degree also includes laceration of the anal mucosa. OASI can lead to chronic maternal complications, including dyspareunia, which is painful intercourse, pelvic floor disorders, mental health morbidity, and anal fecal incontinence. OASI occurs in 4.4 to 6% of vaginal births in Canada, and the rates of OASI in Canada are increasing in individuals having a vaginal birth for the first time. So this graph shows us the temporal trends in OASI in Canada between the years 2004 to 2014, stratified by parity and obstetric history. So you can see in the x-axis, the year of delivery, and the y-axis indicates the rate of obstetric trauma in percentage. And the round markers show us the rate of OASI in those having a first birth. The open triangle markers show those who are having a vaginal birth for the first time after having a cesarean delivery. And we can see in both nulliparous individuals and those who had a previous cesarean delivery, the rate of OASI has increased over this time period. And obstetric anal sphincter injuries is an area worthy of study, particularly in Canada. And this graph shows exactly why. It shows the rate of OASIS with and without instrument in 24 OECD countries in OECD. So in the darker purple bars is without instrument, and lighter is with instrument, such as forceps and vacuums. An orange bar in the center of the graph shows the average of the OECD countries. So that is 1.4 without instrument and 5.3 with instruments. And as you can see on the far right, OASI in Canada is the highest among the countries in this graph. So it is 3.4 without instrument and 16.3 with instrument. Racial and ethnic disparities are pervasive in maternal health and represent a major source of health inequities in many, many settings. Studies of composite severe maternal morbidity across racial groups in Europe, Australia, and North America have shown similar trends. I will go over these two examples. So the red figure on the left shows that Black women face 3 times the maternal mortality risk as white women. And most recent figures have shown even further exacerbated inequity. The light blue figure on the right is from the Embrace report, which was conducted in the UK, showing that Black and Asian women have a higher risk of dying in pregnancy. Despite all this evidence, we have yet to understand the relationship between race, ethnicity, and specific causes of maternal morbidity, and that includes obstetric trauma. So studies have found that Asian individuals living in their country of origin experience lower rates of OASI. However, studies from high-income non-Asian countries have identified an increased risk of OASI in individuals who identify as Asian when compared to those who identify as white. And this is why our study's objective was to evaluate the existing literature comparing the incidence of OASI in individuals who identify as Asian versus white race ethnicity. We searched Medline, Ovid, Embase, MCARE, and the Cochrane database for observational studies, and keywords and controlled vocabulary terms related to race, ethnicity, OASI were used. 2 reviewers independently screened abstracts, performed full text assessments using Covidence, and meta-analysis was performed using Revman for dichotomous data. Here is the Prisma diagram. As you can see, we began with 2,827 studies that were identified through database search. And after going through screening and full text review, we were able to include 27 studies. Now I will discuss the results. So among 24 studies that reported raw numbers, over 2.3 million individuals were included, of which 464,134 identified as Asian and over 1.8 million as white. Out of 27 studies, majority originated from the US and England, as you can see in this graph. And there were also various study designs included, with most being retrospective cohort. And as you can see in this forest plot, pooled estimate was higher in the Asian group. So the odds ratio was 1.6. And in all of our subgroup analyses, the forest plots demonstrated that both South Asian and Chinese individuals were more likely to experience OASI, among other Asian subgroup analyses that we were able to conduct. So the strength of association was highest in South Asian group, but it is important to note that this analysis only included 2 studies. There were several causal mechanisms that were formally explored in the literature. So this was perineal body length, obesity and BMI, and fetal maternal size disproportion, as well as language barrier. And these factors were not found to mediate the association between race and OAZ. Here are some potential causal mechanisms that were not formally explored by the 27 studies included in this study. So there is differential obstetric care, which would include different rates of episiotomy, duration of labor, and potentially different intervention rates. There's also lack of cultural safety, diversity, and overall competence in healthcare. And this would include physician bias towards Western cultural norms, lack of diversity among staff. There are several limitations of the study that I would like to acknowledge. So there is limited race-based data and heterogeneity within conventionally used race categories that continue to be a limitation. There are also several studies that persisted with inappropriate grouping and definitions of race. To conclude, Asian individuals have higher rates of OAZ compared with white individuals. Qualitative and quantitative research to address this knowledge gap is warranted, and it is important for researchers to carefully consider when race is an appropriate variable in research, keeping in mind its sociocultural mechanisms. This challenges us to move beyond and understand the measure to measure the true exposure of interest, which is racism, and the different domains of it. Prenatal and postnatal care that is safe for all birthing individuals must be strongly advocated for and implemented through evidence-based care, and thus practical solutions for clinicians and medical boards to follow are warranted. I would like to thank my co-authors for their support and their insights, and thank you so much for listening, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mi-Jin. I had not seen that international comparison on OAZ before, and I have to say that I'm quite shocked, and clearly there's a lot of room for improvement among obstetricians in Canada and the healthcare system to reduce rates. And I'd invite, again, anyone to ask questions in the chat or to put up your hand, and I'll invite you to ask a question. But I'll ask you to reflect a little bit about, for us, a little bit more on what you said in your conclusions about the collection of race-based data, which is something that we don't do in Canada, and many, including those from equity serving groups, are promoting the collection of ethnicity as part of healthcare administrative data so that we can start to have the data to make those kinds of comparisons. And yet, at the same time, you pointed out that there are sociocultural dynamics involved in the identification of that ethnicity as a part of routine healthcare delivery. And what we actually want to look at is racism. So could you talk to us about what you would recommend? What is your opinion about the way forward here?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for the insightful question. As I said, I think the key thing to kind of do moving forward is combining both qualitative and quantitative research. So quantitative is really great in that it, of course, highlights an issue like, listen, these rates are crazy high, as you said, it's shocking. And seeing kind of the difference between the rates that we find in Asian countries and Canadian or other Western countries' context is concerning. But moving forward, what do we do with that information, right? And I think sometimes quantitative research can be misused because it can be kind of easy to just say, oh, we don't have an explanation to this, but we have these numbers. It must be the Asian woman's fault. What is wrong with their bodies? What are they doing wrong? Were they unwilling to, I don't know, listen to the doctors, to communicate properly? And especially in this neoliberal society where it's very much, and health is very much white-centered, it's very ableist, it's very much kind of catered towards those who are from the higher socioeconomic levels. I think it's really easy to blame the woman, and I think that's why in addition to kind of getting these quantitative stats out, we need qualitative research that actually highlights the experiences of these BIPOC women. What were their experiences when they were giving birth in Western hospitals? What are we doing wrong? What can practitioners and researchers do to make sure that their lived experiences are being heard? What can we do to make sure that healthcare is treated as a human right, and in a way that those that experience any kind of access any kind of healthcare, that's not just in the maternity setting, of course, is being respected, and there is a powerful kind of experience for the patients, instead of feeling useless and feeling like it's their fault and their bodies to be blamed for these extremely detrimental health consequences. Sorry, one more thing I want to add. Sorry, I obviously have a lot to say about this. And I think there has been a lot of really critical tools that have been developed, such as the perceived racism scale. So I think different kind of surveys and questionnaires to get these lived experiences, interviews, of course, are extremely beneficial in this research to really get, for us to really understand racism.
I think it's an excellent response, a passionate response, which I love to see, and which brings me back to what Rulan was saying this morning about you need passion and persistence as a women's health researcher, and that commitment to actually changing care so that healthcare is delivered in a way that is respectful and respects autonomy and promotes health. Ruth is saying in the chat that she, as an OB-GYN resident in Vancouver, has not understood why tears were so much more frequent, particularly among Chinese women, and is saying that it's so important for residents and the medical community to understand that in countries of origin, this is not what's happening. So what is it about the practice and the structural and interpersonal dynamics that are resulting in obstetric trauma in this population? And as you've said, how do we translate then those, both the hard data and the experiences, into training tools that change the way care is actually delivered for better outcomes? So
I definitely thank you so much for the comment, Ruth.
Yes, thank you so much, Mi-Jin. I would welcome all Bryn and Katrina back to give a chance. If anyone has had questions, burning questions coming up for them, we'll have an opportunity to answer them now. So the floor is open for that. We have a few minutes. And then I'll move on if people have general reflections about what they've heard today, or comments that they want to share about their experience of all of us being online here together. I would welcome that. But first, are there any additional questions for Katrina, Mi-Jin, or Bryn? It doesn't seem like anything is burning.
It looks like Yared has a question.
Oh, I'm not seeing that. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for your fantastic presentation and your interesting finding. Just I have one question regarding with heterogeneity treatment. I have seen that the I-square test looks like at the beginning it looks like 92, and is even for the subgroup analysis it looks like 72. So it looks like there is the finding has heterogeneous. The findings looks like heterogeneous. So any further step that you go for treating this heterogeneity? This is my concern. Thanks.
So just to confirm, the question was for me, right? Okay, great.
Yeah, for Mi-Jin, sorry.
No, just wanted to confirm. Thank you so much for bringing it up. Actually, this is definitely an important part of my research and a very big limitation for sure. And it's something that I address in my the publication manuscript that I'm working on. But so to explain, yes, there is a high heterogeneity, unfortunately, and there are kind of a potential couple of reasons for this. So there is, like I mentioned in my presentation, there is a huge variability in race categories right now. So that means some studies went with self-reported race categories, some solely focused on kind of the perceived race by physicians. And there is also variability between geographical regions and its diaspora and environmental factors that kind of created a difference in the results. Like for example, De Silva and Tsai were one of the very few papers that actually expressed that there were lower rates of OAZ in the Asian groups, and they were both conducted in Hawaii, and they were both single-centered studies. So I think it, again, is additional proof that because of these kind of factors, high heterogeneity was something that was a limitation that occurred in this study. And again, I think in an ideal world, of course, we would be able to control for that. But with the existing limitations when it comes to race ethnicity research, this is unfortunately something that we had to experience, and it will definitely be acknowledged in the final manuscript.
Thanks very much, Meijin, and my apologies, Yared, for not seeing your hand. So now I'd welcome any final reflections. I think that I made mine in the introduction, and my reflection has just continued through this session about the very high quality, the rigor and the diversity of these presentations. I feel inspired by this opportunity to come together to keep on doing this work and keep on hosting this event as an annual conference. And I'm sure that my colleagues at the Women's Health Research Cluster would agree with that. Really, the quality has been exceptional. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'll move on now. It's my great pleasure to get to announce the winners of, and thank you for the claps, Catherine. I wanted to give Bryn, Katrina, and Meijin a virtual round of applause at this point, because they were really great presentations. So bravo to all of you. And now it's my pleasure to get to announce the winners. And I thought I will start with the People's Choice Poster Award winners. And I would invite you, if you're here, to please come onto the screen. You can stay muted, but we'd all like to see you and recognize you. And the poster award winners will each receive $25. And the first one is Erin Fitzpatrick, Bedtime Battles and Bedroom Bliss, investigating cross-sectional and daily links between infant temperament and sleep with new parents, couples, sexual and romantic relationships. Bravo, Erin. And you're very welcome. Congratulations. And Vasilea Karasava, image-based sexual abuse as a form of gendered violence. Congratulations, Vasilea.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Bravo. And now I will move on to the oral presentations, but before I do so, I want to express my really profound appreciation to our judges. So our judges were extremely generous in sharing their abstracts, not only to identify the top oral presentations, but also in taking the time to review all of the abstracts to help us create the excellent program that we presented here today. And so if they could please turn on their camera. I see Dr. Martha Painter is already on the screen. And so I'm going to introduce each of them in turn, and we are going to give them a big virtual round of applause. So Dr. Painter is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Nursing at the University of New Brunswick, and she is both a member of BC's Women's Health Research Institute and an affiliate scientist with the IWK Health. Cindy Barha is assistant professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of Calgary and is also an alum and a continued member of the Women's Health Research Institute. We were also joined by Dr. Elizabeth Onyango, who's an assistant professor of health and sustainable communities in the School of Public Health at the U of A and a member of the Women and Children's Health Research Institute. Dr. Hilary Brown is an assistant professor at the U of T in the Department of Health and Society and is also with the Dalai Lama School of Public Health at U of T and an adjunct scientist with the Women's College Hospital's Women's College Research Institute. And finally, but not at all last in the importance is Dr. Holly Hunsberger, who's an assistant professor at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science in Chicago, Illinois, and a member of the Women's Health Research Cluster. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you for really your generosity of spirit in supporting this and the judging of the oral presentations. So I welcome a round of applause for our judges. And now I get to announce who those winners are. So in third place is Katrina Hittman, who presented on psychiatric admissions in the postnatal period. Congratulations, Katrina, and thank you so much. In second place is Alexandra Brouillard, who enlightened us about the effects of oral contraception on brain morphology, which was a really thought-provoking presentation that I appreciated hugely. And finally, the first place winner is Mei Jing Park, who has just shared with us white Asian disparities in OASI. Congratulations, Mei Jing. And now I will turn it over to, oh, I have more thank yous. I just wanted to give my personal thanks to the staff of the Women's Health Research Cluster that have really done the heavy lifting in the organization of this conference. So a big round of applause to them, and of course to UBC, to the foundations that support Power, and to all of you for attending this event. And now I'll pass it to Catherine, who may have a few words and also wants to share about an upcoming Women's Health Research Cluster event. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thanks, Jamil. You're so great at sharing thanks to people. I'll echo all of your sentiments and just point out that the staff that are on the call who really did the most heavy lifting is Ivani Dunna. She's been in the background doing a lot of Zoom work. Bonnie, who you saw moderate at the beginning of the day, also has been a great help, and Amy Thatcher, who's not on the call right now. So thank you to all of them for making this possible. Before we close, I just want to let you guys know that the Women's Health Research Cluster is holding their last event of not 2023, but of this sort of academic cycle on June 28th. It's called How to SGBA Ask Me Anything. It's a very casual 1-hour Zoom drop-in with Dr. Elizabeth Rideout, who's one of the co-leads of our organization and knows a lot about integrating sex into research. And it's intended to be an opportunity for anyone on the call and off the call to pop in and just ask questions about how to incorporate sex and gender into their research. It could be anything from developing a research question to your methodology to analyzing data, disseminating information. We can't promise that we know the answer to all of your questions, but we can promise that we will try our best to direct you in the right path forwards if we don't. So you don't need to register for the event. Just check out our event channel on the Women's Health Research Cluster website, find the Zoom link, plop it into your calendar, and then pop on and say hi. I'll be there too if you just want to chat. So with that, I'll say thank you again to everybody for being here, all of the poster presenters, to Mill, all of our judges, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.